So thank you for being here. So I'm going to have you guys take turns. First of all, I'll let you introduce yourselves specifically and what your job is and exactly how you see your job and what you do.
Okay, I'll start. First of all, I haven't heard Sacramento mentioned so many times in one conference, so thank all of you. I'll be sending you that $20, I promise. My name is Sonya Bradley. I am the Chief of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion for Visit Sacramento. I've held that job for a year. It was a year in April. I actually celebrated 20 years with Visit Sacramento on the 5th, so I've been there quite a long time. I oversee the marketing. And long story short, not too different than pretty much a lot of organizations in this country. 2020 was a awakening, and I think we all had a reckoning. We all had to look in the mirror. And it was actually my boss, who he and I have actually had interesting conversations over the years. I've known him a long time, about diversity, equity, inclusion. He've always asked me questions about things, and we've always had that kind of relationship. But he actually came to me and said, everyone put out a statement, everyone did this. He said, well, you really want to do something more than that, and asked me if I would take on the role. And I thought about it, and actually gave it a lot of thought, and talked to a lot of people in different industries, and decided that I would take it on. And
so the role didn't exist until you got it, right?
It did not exist.
And how many years are we talking?
1 year in April.
Okay, wow.
Yep.
All right.
And I've been developing ever since, and we can get into that.
Okay. Sophia.
So I have been doing social inclusion work for over 20 years now. The first chapter of my life, I used to do international development work. So I was doing a lot of work around the world, economic development, gender empowerment, sustainable economic development as well. I segued into the travel industry about 8 years ago, specifically working on diversity, equity, inclusion strategies, trainings, workshops, by way of a travel app that I pitched at a startup weekend in North Carolina. Maybe that's my silly fact.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
And I was going to Argentina for a friend of mine's wedding, and I was looking for an app that could help me pack in a way that was culturally appropriate, provide me with cultural tips and shopping advice, so I could make sure I was appropriately prepared. So I pitched this idea at a startup week in North Carolina. We ended up winning crowd favorite. And I had people that were coming up to me and saying, I could really use something like this, business and leisure travelers. Because when I go places, there's always things that are lost in translation.
Right.
And I would love to be able to connect with people better. And so I thought, I quit my job for a reason. Am I going to pitch an app, or am I going to do something that creates systemic change? And I made the decision of not doing the app, but starting my business. But by way of that, longer story, maybe during cocktails, I'll tell you the full story. There's a cliffhanger there.
Those are coming up, by the way, at 4:00. We have bourbon, so stay awake. Yeah.
And I took on this role at Destinations International. It's 3 months and going.
So you are the first diversion equity, DEI officer at DI.
The first official. Yes.
Official, okay.
We've been doing diversity, equity, inclusion work for 4 years now. Melissa Cherry, who is up there, who is not here today. Yeah. Sadly, she was going to be our third powerhouse. She started the initiative at DI, and I am that first role to take on.
So I'm going to put you both on a spot. You have 30 seconds each. This is your elevator pitch. What do you do? What is your job? How would you describe your job in 30 seconds? 29, 28?
I feel like, based on my background and what I'm doing now, I am connecting our community to what we do. I am looking into communities that have not been part of the tourism economy and trying to bring them in, just basically expanding that table for them.
Okay. Sophia?
So from the role of a travel association, I'm really excited to be able to create frameworks, EDI frameworks for our members, for our industry. So we can use these frameworks, adapt them to our destination through all verticals, through sales, through marketing, through education through all verticals.
Okay. So I think the crowd can understand why it takes a little bit of a long conversation for them to really communicate exactly what they do, because it's on one level it's so abstract, trying to create frameworks and trying to create communities or contact communities. And how are those communities identified? Let's start there. How do you identify the communities you serve?
For me, a lot of some of it has been actually people coming to us. Quite frankly, when the position was announced, there were people in the community who contacted us and said,
okay.
We really want to be a part of this, but we don't know how. We could use your help. And having essentially a point person has helped a lot. For example,
give me an example of one of those communities.
Yeah, so we have an area of Sacramento known as Little Saigon. It's essentially where in the 1970s, many of the folks from Vietnam and Indochina came to settle. And they've built up a very robust community. And we're talking first, second, third generations of people. And I've had the opportunity to go down and it's the kind of community, those of us in the destination marketing world, where, it's kind of like, I don't know, it's a little sketchy, transportation's tough. But the reality is, if you literally pull away a few layers, there's just a lot there. And these are great people. They have great stories. I mean, I've come from the marketing background, or still in marketing, really. And that's what we do. We tell stories. And so that's what I'm pulling out.
So that's on a local DMO level, right, Sacramento. On the national level, an accrediting organization like DEI, that does a lot of other things as well. But how would you affect that on a national level? What do you do to make that happen?
So from my standpoint, our community are our members, they're our partners. And what I've been working on doing the past 3 months, and I will always continue to do, is to listen to my members. I want to listen to where we have a few things taking place. One of them is our CEO pledge, our CEO EDI pledge. So I'm committed to having 100% of our members sign that pledge to hold our destinations accountable to equity, diversity, and inclusion. And with that being said, I plan on reaching out to every member to gain best practices, what's working well in your communities, because there's this not only this country, but this world has so much to offer with respect to what we're doing.
Sure.
And I want to share that, I want to celebrate that, but I also want to understand what you need help with. So I want to collect and understand what you need help with from a training perspective, from a community perspective, so I can build resources, can build services to adapt to your needs. That's the exciting part for me.
And I'm guessing DEI will likely, if it doesn't have now, have some sort of accreditation, a DEI accreditation for local DMOs?
So that's a work in progress. So
okay.
Right now we're developing our EDI assessment tool, which is to be launched in July at our annual convention. It's a way for destinations to measure their where they're at with respect to EDI. Right. And it's not a place of judgment. It's just a place to understand where you are.
Yeah, you said something nice when we talked the first time. You said we meet them where they are, right? And we help them along. So this is really a nonstop process, right? This is something that needs constant tending to.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Things change every day, and it's important to be aware of them, but also to meet people where they're at.
Sure. Sonya, how do you determine your boss? How does your boss determine your success metrics? What measures your success in doing what you do?
Right now, there's a little bit even on the marketing side. I know we'll hear a little bit tomorrow because I'm working with Communify, so we have some very metrics along there. Also, the level of engagement I'm able to do, and honestly, sometimes it feels very nebulous, right? What is the measurement? I've been told over and over again, what gets measured gets done. So I'm looking at how many partners we're bringing in, how much sponsorships are we doing? A lot of times the groups that we're working with, honestly, they need sponsorships that they haven't been able to get.
Right.
So those are some of the metrics that we are looking at. It's not just that we're going to measure and sort of, because we're still setting that foundation a little bit.
And I mean, and this is the question. Look, everyone in this room answers to somebody. Everyone has a budget that has to be accounted for, and that's usually has some sort of, what are the KPIs? How are you meeting your objectives, your goals? And in this, I think that word, I love the word. It is nebulous. It seems it from the outside. And I can't imagine how difficult it is for even on this stage to articulate what you do, internally to articulate what you do to your teams. How do you do that? Let me throw it at you because you're smiling like, oh God, I want to do that.
I'm smiling because the nebulous. If someone asks, what do you do every day? And I'm like, honestly, every day is a new day. I don't know what I do every day, but I know I get stuff done. I mean, it's what was your question?
How do you communicate up and down to internal and externally? How do you communicate what you do? I don't mean to harp on that so much, but I think it's important in this group to really understand what a DEI officer is, because this is a growing field, and almost every corporation now has one. And it's great to hear from you guys because you are bathed in it right now, and maybe you're so close to it like a fish with water. But do you have special ways of communicating to your constituents, both in-house and out-of-house? Are those different voices? Can you talk through that a little bit for me?
Sure. So for the past 3 months, I've been trying to make sure I listen to the team. I make sure that I listen to our members, our partners. I don't want to do anything that comes from what I think should happen. I really am taking time to assess what's taking place. What are people looking for? What do they need? What does my team need? What questions do they have? What do my members need? What questions do they have? Where are their pitfalls? What are they working through?
Right.
I'm at that stage right now where I've gotten a good sense of that, and I'm now in the process of developing just that, some frameworks, some way for us to be able to infuse education, to be able to hold discussions about things that Sonya may be dealing with, things that our other members may be dealing with. So internally, I'm working with our teams on how to improve how we do our meetings and events. How do we improve our education? What kind of speakers are we representing in our events? Externally, I'm working with, we have an EDI committee. Sonya is one of the co-chairs.
Sure.
Working with our members to understand the issues that are at hand.
So you have a several front war going on. Because you have to educate. You have to bring them along. You have to articulate what you're doing, and probably set your own metrics. There was a great presentation this morning from CMI. Most everyone in this room saw it, and it was about where we are with LGBTQIA+. Of all those letters, and which is the best order of those letters, and how did we arrive at this? How, and given what you do for diversity, equity, inclusion, how do you address each of those constituencies individually, or do you? Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, absolutely. Actually, I will tell you that, we've actually established an LGBTQ community to help us understand everything from the language, what it is that they want from us. It's about really, like you said, listening to the community and honestly helping us spread our wings so that we can reach out to them. The one thing that I have learned, and I think I heard it earlier, the one area that I think consistently gets overlooked is accessibility, people with disabilities. I have learned quite a bit. I have a DEI external committee, and I have 2 people with disabilities on them. And every meeting, they always interject and says, okay, but what about people who have a disability issue? And the thing, as we have learned, what I've learned is there's hidden and visual.
Right.
We can see the disabilities, and they're very good about making sure that we are thinking about that. That is an area that, we're literally going from 0 to 100. You always think you're thinking of everyone, but until you actually talk to the people who are living that.
And that's kind of my point. It seems like the communities you service are, it could be never ending, honestly, depending upon how far you want to go to find someone else who could be in this. But you said something on the call, Sonya, that I thought was really lovely, that it's really not about the in-house people. It's not about the DEI officers. It's about finding ambassadors in those communities to mine for information and to be your mouthpiece and kind of be your feelers out in the community. Can either of you talk through that?
Yeah, as an example, I'll just use they're actually a husband and wife team. We're going to honestly sponsor them for a weekend stay in Sacramento. And we're not going to tell anyone that there's, what we used to call secret shopping, and we want to get their raw feedback. We want to know what it's like as a person in a wheelchair, what it's like to navigate Sacramento from the time you check in to your room, how was the dining experience, and we'll take that feedback and we'll share that with our partners.
So that's a first step on an internal look at something and how we can do, what are the lowest hanging fruits? How can we change those? That's awesome. And anything on that level with you?
Yeah, absolutely. So in the past 3 months, we've been looking at our reports that we produce to make sure that they're accessible from an auditory standpoint, from an accessibility standpoint. Someone mentioned Zoom earlier. We've just enabled closed captioning on our webinars to make sure that from an accessibility standpoint, we are meeting some of those needs. It's always a work in progress. And so I'm always learning. So just because I'm a chief diversity officer doesn't mean I know everything. I'm constantly learning, and I constantly want to make sure that I have that open mind so I can hear what our travelers are looking for, what our businesses are looking for, what our destinations are looking for, and make recommendations that are doable and not, out there. They can be out there,
sure,
but I want to provide steps to get there.
Where do you face resistance? What is your greatest source of resistance in trying to achieve any of your particular objectives? Or does the sources of resistance change? Is it organizational? Is it C-suite? What do you think is the most difficult? And don't worry, your bosses aren't watching, are they?
I think from our standpoint, a lot of it is still talking about the business case for me, for
right.
EDI. Why does it matter? And, we represent a lot of different destinations. And in my lens, I take it back to, this is going to come up. I'm a yoga instructor and a meditation instructor, and that helps me get through a lot of things. But I take that mindset with me, again, of meeting people where they are. So while I want to get past us talking about why this work is important, and I want to get to the work. Some places still need that. And so it's a matter of making sure that I provide that information, but also I want to make sure that I'm providing adapting to other areas that are destinations.
What would you, Sonya? Where would you find resistance?
It's from the people who haven't quite put their full trust in us, because perhaps there were promises made and not kept. And so being there to honestly look them in the eye and say, yes, we're serious about this.
Right.
And they're going to tread slowly because, there wasn't a me there, right? Or Sophia, or other people who have been doing this. Quite frankly, there are people who have been doing this for a while. And so looking at us sort of side-eyeing going, okay, you said, 2 years ago, you were going to, we do a big event, Bridge Dinner. You were going to have more people of color on, chefs. What's up with that?
Right.
So that's a big part of it. And it reminded me of a saying I heard years ago. We always like to say that it's the thought that counts. That's a lie. It's the effort that counts. And if I think people can see the effort, and I mean like serious effort,
yep,
then they're more inclined to trust you.
I love that. I'm going to steal that. It's not the thought, it's the effort that counts. Where do you all find your inspiration? Do you go to national organization conferences like this just for DEI, or do you do online webinars? Where have you been getting your best practices?
A couple of, I'm a big reader, so, I read quite a few things. The nice thing is, in being in part of the sort of DEI world, I've met more people who are doing this, and we have a lot of ad hoc discussions.
Right.
So that really helps a lot.
I'd say, the community of DEI professionals, and I'm listening to this podcast called Code Switch right now, which is phenomenal.
It's the NPR podcast.
It is the NPR podcast, and it's one of my favorite podcasts to listen to because I learned so much from that. And I'd say that I've been reading a lot of books about belonging. The work that I'd like to roll out with DI is about welcoming and belonging, because it's a very human connection that we all want to have. So I've been reading Brene Brown's book on belonging as well.
What advice would you give to people in the crowd out here if they're taking notes on this and they're going to go back and report to their CEOs or whomever and say, yeah, I sat through an entire thing with DEI officers. If they wanted to start this or start the conversation in their organizations because maybe they don't have one, maybe there's not budget for it within some of the smaller organizations, maybe it's someone's going to be double tasked with being the DEI officer in addition to their job, which I know a lot of organizations that's the case. But what advice would you give someone sitting out there wants to come back and make a good impression and say, hey, look, this is what I learned and this is how we start? How would you tell them to start?
I mean, the natural thing is say, come to me.
Yeah. But that's a good point, to contact you at DI, right?
I'm a resource.
Okay.
I'm here to support and I'm here to listen because every situation is different. And so I'd say, I'm a resource, but also think about why this work is important for you. Why are you so passionate about it? Think about that. And then think about what that delivery looks like to your CEO. It has to come from the heart.
So, but you're a resource just for DI members, or can someone just send you an email saying, hey, we're thinking of this. Do you have a minute to chat?
I want to be a resource for everyone.
Awesome.
This work is really important. So It's not a one and done. I'm committed. I've been committed for the past 20 plus years. Right. I'm committed for life. So I'm a resource. Please contact me.
And so, Sonya, in Sacramento, what do you think the impetus was? Because I know DMOs much larger than Sacramento that do not have a chief diversity, equity, and inclusion officer, and you guys do. What do you think? How did that go?
It went well. I mean, honestly, I didn't know what to expect. But like I said, I gave it a lot of thought. I know that some of the larger DMOs have had someone working in DEI or multicultural. They've been doing it for years. I mean, literally, those are the shoulders I stand on. But what I have found is that in our destination, I mean, according to U.S. News and World Report, we're like the third largest, third most diverse city in the country.
Okay.
Most of them are in California. So that actually, I mean, it's a little bit of a no-brainer in that sense. Like, we need to be a part of that. And it's been, it has been a lot of support. I think also our city of Sacramento had already also started this work. So being able to align, honestly, with your political officials.
So you just plug into what's there already?
Well, you don't necessarily plug in, but you align yourself.
Okay, gotcha.
I will tell you, I've spent more time with city council members than I have in all the time I've been there. It's not so much, and it's not like glad-handing, it's literally showing up in their communities. Right. Has been very helpful. Being there when they're, out doing the work. That's how, one of the reasons I, found myself in Little Saigon. I met the council member. Right. He wants to do more. And so being able to do that has been a boost for being able to do it.
And given that, what you're telling me is that this seems to be an ever-growing constituency, and those constituencies within have sub-constituencies. Is there a scramble for resources? Are they sometimes at loggerheads over who wants to get more attention, or who needs more of your assistance, or who needs more exposure to the tourism world? Do you ever have to be referee or tag out or explain?
I have not yet.
Okay.
That has not occurred. Knock on wood.
Sophia, what's your take on that? I mean, there seems to be a lot of subgroups within DEI as an umbrella, as a huge umbrella, and oftentimes groups will vie for attention or top billing within that substructure. Do you ever run into anything on that level?
Well, what's great is I have a lot of our members that are coming and asking me for help and asking for my time, and I think that's a good thing. That's a great thing. While I'm, one person, I'll try to make sure that I make time to have those conversations because they're critical. So, for me, it's a mix of both. It is making sure that I make myself accessible which is really important. And the other aspect of that, is a bit of the advocacy piece to make sure that the importance of equity, diversity, inclusion is known among our members.
Right. It's funny. It's sometimes it's DEI, sometimes it's EDI. And I asked you all this on the phone. I gave him some homework, but I get the diversity part of it. I understand the inclusion. I think the equity is a little bit, to borrow my friend's here word, nebulous. How would you define equity? What is equity to you, Sonya?
It's for us. It's really how do we provide the opportunity to lift someone up? As an example,
how we provide the opportunity to lift someone up. Oh, okay, that's nice.
As an example, we do a festival. It's put on. We produced the whole thing, and it's one of the largest festivals in the city. It's called Farm to Fork Festival, and the feedback, either behind our backs or in front of us, was that sure didn't feel very diverse there. And there were probably several reasons, but one of them I think was a cost barrier. And so we partnered with Bank of America and said we want to diversify our vendors. We want to give them the opportunity to get new customers on board, to be part of something that's a really big thing for our city. Like it's a major tourism driver for us. And so how do we bring in all these bring in people who have solid products and may not have had the opportunity to be a part of that. And it could be even a perception issue, but I find going to people directly and talking to them, they want to be a part and they welcome the opportunity. So we offered essentially a scholarship for 10 vendors, people of color, LGBTQ, to apply to receive their vendor fees paid for, booth, and extra promotion. We do a ton of promotion for this event. And to a person, they all said, thank you for the opportunity. They've now grown their client list. One of them is supplying the toffee, which I cannot get enough of. Where
are our samples? Come on.
I know, right?
Yeah, thank you.
For like Bank of America. So all we did was just provide an opportunity.
Gotcha.
And I feel, and again, I am speaking it from what we can do as an organization, but it's something that I feel it's definitely something to measure.
And that's interesting because it's a hands-on. You are where the rubber hits the road, really. You're on the DMO level. You're on the national accreditation level. But you aren't getting out of answering the question, Sophia. What's your definition of equity?
So, honestly, it's similar to Sonia's, where I think about the voices that I haven't provided access to yet. So I'm thinking about the opportunity that exists for voices I haven't heard yet, and I want to be able to provide access to those voices from an opportunity standpoint. From an image standpoint, some people may have seen it. There's this one graphic that shows the top part of one bike that a child is supposed to ride, someone that is in a wheelchair is supposed to ride the same bike, and it's not meeting people where they're at. Mm-hmm. But the second graphic of equity shows that everyone wants to ride a bike, but you're giving them different types of bikes so they can exceed and be the best they can at riding that bike. And I think about that a lot, about the fact that we all want to, at the core of us, feel like we belong and feel like we want to be welcomed.
Sure.
What kind of opportunities can I provide to help people feel that way?
And those bikes, that's a beautiful metaphor, by the way. But if you had to, and I'll one up it now, and probably destroy it in the process. But if those bikes, those constituency, those very different groups, all under the umbrella, are you identifying them, or then they identifying themselves, or is it this squeaky wheel that gets the oil? I mean, I'm just trying to gauge, because it seems like you have such a huge amount of people whose needs need to be addressed or included. How do you go about sorting? Do you keep a list of every one of your subsets? How do you even just do that on a pragmatic way?
I don't know. I mean, in fact, I do have a list of just things we do, who people are, et cetera. I haven't yet run into that to that extent.
Because I thought your example of Little Saigon was fascinating. That wouldn't be on the top of my head, but that it presented itself as an opportunity, and you took advantage of the opportunity, and now it's something, and they've been served, and they're part of the great fabric that is your city, right?
And the thing is too, it opened my eyes to seeing all the other communities and how I can perhaps go in and help them. And someone was mentioning yesterday, how do you balance the needs of what the community wants and your tourism needs? And I don't know the answer to that. I'll just say that straight off. But I know there are other communities that have something similar, and I think it's up to us to help figure that out.
And that same constituency question for you, Sophia, do you just go about saying, hey, I want to help this group, and this group comes to you, or this one's making the most noise? How do you address that?
It's a little bit of both, because I still have my entrepreneurial side in me, and I think about what it was like for me to be an entrepreneur, and I think about the access to opportunity that I have had, or the opportunities that I've missed. And so I take a little bit of that lens with me to think about, what opportunities are out there that communities haven't connected to or they don't know about. And I try to have conversations with our members, our destinations, to ask them those questions.
So you go back to, it's your job to listen.
Absolutely.
Right, yeah.
It's my job to listen. And honestly, I think about where I've been, and I use my experiences as well.
On the call we talked about, and I'm not talking out of school here, but there seems to be a fair amount of burnout in this position, and I think it all has to do with what we were talking about here. It's how nebulous it is, how tough it is to define, how tough it is to set benchmarks and create objectives for the position. Do you think as these positions become more defined and more solidified and people get used to wrap their head around what a DEI officer is, that will change? Or do you think that's just the nature? Because it requires so much empathy to be in these positions and to do this on a daily basis. What's your knee-jerk on that, Sonya? What would you say?
I think, yes, I do believe there's a big potential for that. But this work can't be done if your leadership, if you're not the leadership, isn't behind you 100%. That's really what I think the reason the burnout can be so strong.
Yeah, and one of you said it, maybe it was you on the call, that what is leadership? Leadership is support, right? They support you in what you're doing, and they let you, and I get it, particularly when it's a government position, and each of those positions is precious, and it has to be accounted for, and it has to be, they have to be, you have to make the case, the business case for these positions. Go back to the word business case. I could imagine it being something that drags on you daily, that we case for something for which there really isn't a 100%. Do you feel that way, Sophia?
Well, I think for me, I take this work so seriously, and I put a lot of pressure on myself, because I want to create change. I want to create change in a very meaningful and impactful way.
Okay.
I'm not here to check off a box. And so I put pressure on myself to want to get work done. So I think it's really important, to Sonia's point, that burnout can happen if leadership doesn't support you. Burnout can also happen if you don't have your own support system as well. Mental health is another aspect that's really important piece of this job. And it's important to keep that in mind as well. At the end of the day, we're human. And we also have emotions tied to this type of role. And so to be very honest about the human toll this can take, the emotional toll it can take, is also really important to create that space.
Mm-hmm. Sonya, what's your favorite part of your job? What do you like most about doing what you do?
Honestly, it's been meeting. I've met so many different people. Again, I've been in the industry for a very long time, and I'm amazed.
You were in marketing before?
Yes.
Okay.
It's honestly been meeting the different people. I was just popped into my head, but we hosted we brought in a group called Color of Music Festival. It's an all-Black classical musicians festival last year. They're out of Charleston, South Carolina, first time on the West Coast, and we had a series of concerts. pretended to mostly by members of the Black community in Sacramento. I just remember this one young lady coming up to me and said, she played, I'm gonna get the instrument wrong, but it's not a violin, might be a viola. She said, I never met a Black woman who played the viola. That's the thing that keeps you going. That is the thing that keeps you going. So it's just been, those are the things that I'm happy to do.
I love it. Sophia.
For me, it's the moments, the aha moments that I see people have. And it's that empathy and it's the connection of, I never thought about that before. I never felt that before. Now I get it. And that keeps me going, to be able to help people think differently and to have those aha moments.
So 2 things. If we could get a mic for the audience, we're going to take a few questions, if y'all could bring it out. And secondly, a show of hands, how many people in here work for organizations that have a DEI office or a department or somehow objective? Wow, that's great. That's great. How many don't? Okay. Awesome. Do we have questions, please? Well, we start over with Rachel right there, behind you, Becca, right there.
Okay, thank you. So quick question. So I actually pre-travel world in my life. I lived in Pennsylvania. I worked with a company where I helped them roll out an LGBT employee resource group, which was super rewarding. Got to travel all over and go to factories where people didn't even know what D&I was. I also see my wife, who works for a Tampa Electric company, and this isn't tourism space, but I'm finding that D&I is becoming a topic more and more, even in companies that are old boy, old male club. But my question really is that I've seen, and this might sound white, so my apologies ahead of time, but I'm seeing a lot of D&I initiatives in corporations where there's so much focus on one demographic and that the other demographics get left out of the discussion. It happens a lot, like with her company, they rolled out D&I, she was asked to be on the board. Not once have they mentioned LGBTQ. They mention, Black, other minority groups, but there's not that topic. We don't talk about Asian. There's nothing else being talked about. How do you handle that in the D&I world? Because you're talking about a lot of different communities and subgroups.
So for me, the first conversation I have with if I'm facilitating a conversation, what have you, is to discuss the definition of what diversity means,
right,
what equity means, what inclusion means. Because I often think we've had this conversation before that we say DEI, we say DEI, we say EDI, just assuming that we all know what it means because people say it so much. So I always start off each conversation with, let's talk about what this means, because it's much broader than we think. And to make sure we have that conversation is the first part of awareness.
It would be hard enough to define when the terms are defined, right? When the terms are not defined, it becomes impossible. Any other questions out here? Right here in the front.
Can you give us an example?
Sorry, she's coming up with the mic for you right there.
Can you give us some examples of policies that you've helped inspire, like something tangible that you've helped an organization change?
Me? So from a policy standpoint, I'm a policy nerd and I develop policy. So that's where I get really excited. I've helped different organizations first, without even developing the policy, first understanding where they are in their journey from a DEI standpoint. And then I help organizations develop DEI policy in a participatory way. And by that, I mean, it goes from defining what diversity, equity, and inclusion means for the organization, including that in the policy, talking about HR, what that looks like, what marketing looks like, how organizations want to hold themselves accountable, how often they'll check in, and that's all usually in an EDI policy. So I've done that personally for different nonprofits in the tech world, and this was before my current role, and that's actually a part of some of the frameworks I'll be developing in the destination space as well. But the important part here is doing it in a participatory way, where your teams are involved, your teams have say in what the policy means, and the other piece of the policy is to ensure that it's not just a document, that it's adaptable to change.
Right. Any other questions? On that policy note, just one thing. Because when you take over a position that exists, there's a lot of documentation, there's lots of policies in place already. Particularly with you're the first of it in Sacramento. Was part of your job responsibility creating that raft of documents for the next person? Are you still in the process of that? How does that work for you?
Still in the process. At the time I took the job, we did not have an HR director. We now have one. I do know that of the three pillars I wanted, which is one was education and development for our skill development for our team. It is the area that I have not done a good job in. So I need we got an HR director and we are aligned in this. And so that is our next step as we're putting together the policies, to your point, working with the team. But one of the first things we did, honestly, it wasn't even in our value statements, right? Everyone has a mission, blah, blah, blah. And so we just changed our value statement to add that diversity, equity, and inclusion is part of our values.
So it must be kind of exciting because you get to make those definitions, right? You kind of get to define the position as you see it, define the words to how you view what any DEI means. Next year at this time, when we're talking again, if you could each give me one benchmark or one thing that you hope you will have achieved in the next year that you seem like right now, I don't know whether that's going to happen. Sophia, you have anything on your radar that you think, man, I would love to have that done by next year?
This is hard because I'm developing my strategy right now. I would like to have the discussion of lessening the business case and a discussion about how we're implementing.
Got you. Yep. Sonya, anything?
Going back to the area that I haven't done a good job in is that I have our entire staff able to feel comfortable having the discussion around DEI.
Those are great, and they sound like pretty achievable objectives. I want to thank you both for taking your time and your expertise to slow down and explain to us as we try to wrap our minds around DEI and particularly what you do. I love the idea that you're a resource for anyone in this room. You can get her contact information. Did you have a question, DJ?
I did.
Sure. One more.
You don't mind? I'm pretty loud, so. To Amory's question earlier, do you have any specific case studies that you can talk about where you've taken the concept that you explained that I've just been listening to and actually applied it? And then the second part of that is what results happened as a result of that application?
From an assessment and a policy standpoint, From the case study that I specifically was talking to you about, there was actually greater retention in staff. That's one of the big benchmarks that I can think of.
I want to follow up a little bit, if you don't mind.
We're a little behind. Can we do it during break?
Yeah.
Okay, I appreciate that. Thank you, DJ. Please give it up for Sonya Bradley and Sophia Hyder Hock, our DEI specialists. Thank you so much.